I'd always loved the quiet. My little slice of land was tucked away far enough from town that I barely saw my neighbors, and that was just the way I liked it. The lake was the crown jewel of my property, calm, clean, and completely mine. It had been in my family for decades. My grandfather used to fish off the old wooden dock, and I kept it going out of respect for him. Nothing fancy, just peaceful. I had never signed up for an HOA, and technically, I wasn't inside their boundary lines. That was made clear on every zoning map and deed. Still, the HOA had a presence in the area, just on the far side of the lake. From time to time, I'd get a newsletter or a notice by mistake. I usually tossed them without a second thought. After all, their rules didn't apply to me. I wasn't part of their neighborhood. I kept to myself, paid my taxes, and minded my land. Then, everything changed on a Tuesday morning. I woke up to a deep rumble. At first, I thought it was a thunderstorm. But when I opened the front door, I saw clouds of dust rising over the hill near the lake. Trucks. Big ones. With concrete mixers, cranes, and work crews shouting over each other. I stood there in disbelief. It looked like a construction site had sprung up overnight. I walked down toward the lake, heart pounding. The peaceful view I'd seen every day for years was now blocked by scaffolding and machinery. Trees had been cleared. Gravel was poured along the shoreline. A temporary fence stretched out in the water like it was meant to claim part of the lake itself. That's when I saw a big white banner hanging from the tallest pole. Future site of Lakeside Shores Resort, a community luxury experience. I stood frozen. Resort? On my lake? I flagged down one of the workers, a guy in a yellow vest carrying blueprints. "What's going on here?" I asked. He looked me up and down and said, "We're building phase 1 of the HOA's new resort. Pool, spa, event center. Gonna be beautiful when it's done." I stared at him. "This is my land." He raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that?" "Yes," I said. "I live right over that hill. This lake is private." He gave a shrug. "You'll have to take that up with the HOA board." I didn't even respond. I turned around and marched back to my cabin. I needed answers, and fast. I opened the file cabinet in the corner of the living room and pulled out everything I had: deeds, maps, zoning forms. I even dug out the old hand-drawn sketch my grandfather had used to argue for property lines back in the day. Every single piece of paper confirmed what I already knew. The lake, and the land around it, was mine. I called the number listed on one of those old newsletters. It rang twice before a perky voice picked up. "Good morning. Lakeside Community, this is Melissa speaking." I didn't waste time. "Hi, Melissa. I'm calling because I just found construction crews building on my land. They say the HOA is putting up a resort." Her tone changed immediately. "Who is this?" I gave her my name and address. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Oh, you're the Lakeside owner." "Yes, the Lakeside owner who's not part of your HOA," I said firmly. She hesitated again. There may have been a misunderstanding about shared access rights. "What rights?" I snapped. "No one asked. No one contacted me. You're building on my land." Melissa tried to sound calm. "I think it would be best if you spoke with our president at the next board meeting." I hung up without another word. I felt a mix of disbelief and rage. Who just builds a resort on someone else's property and calls it a misunderstanding? I looked back out the window. The trucks were still moving, crews still shouting, trees still falling. If I didn't stop this now, they'd keep going. They'd dig deeper, pour foundations, and pretend it was all legal. And by the time I got the courts involved, the damage would already be done. They thought I'd just sit and watch while they stole my lake. They were wrong. The next morning, I was at the county clerk's office before they even flipped the sign to open. I had a folder in one hand and coffee in the other, running on barely 2 hours of sleep. My brain was buzzing. I needed answers, fast, and I wasn't about to sit around and let some HOA dream project swallow my land. The woman at the counter was polite but cautious, probably used to angry property owners. I gave her my parcel number and asked if there had been any recent filings or easement changes involving my lake. She typed for a while, clicked through several screens, and then raised her eyebrows. "There's been no activity tied to your land," she said. "No new easements, no permits, no transfer filings." I leaned in. "And the HOA? Any requests for shared development around the lake?" She shook her head. "Nothing's been submitted under their name that involves your parcel." My heart was still racing, but now it was joined by something else: validation. I wasn't losing my mind. What they were doing wasn't just pushy. It was illegal. I thanked her and walked out, pulling out my phone before I even hit the parking lot. I called a local land use attorney, someone a neighbor had once recommended when a zoning line dispute broke out a few years back. He agreed to meet with me that afternoon. When I showed him the photos, the construction footage, and the deed records, he sat back in his chair and let out a low whistle. "Well, they've really outdone themselves." He explained what I suspected. Without a legal right to use the land, the HOA had no business building anything on it. No matter what banners they hung or what plans they sold to their members, it didn't matter if the land was privately owned and properly recorded. And in my case, it was. But that wasn't all. He pulled up a satellite map and overlaid the county zoning data. We zoomed in, and that's when I saw it. My property lines extended even farther than I thought. Not only did I own the lake and its banks, but I also owned a buffer zone that wrapped around part of the community's outer edge. The HOA hadn't just crossed a line, they had built an entire project right in the middle of it. "Do you know how much this land is worth now?" he asked. I shook my head. He laughed. "With that view, that water, and the development already in place, even if you didn't build a single thing, this land could fetch a fortune." That hit me hard. They were trying to profit off land they didn't own, turning my quiet lake into a revenue stream for homeowners who didn't even know the resort sat on stolen soil. And if I hadn't caught it early, they might have gotten away with it. I left the law office with a plan. Step 1. Shut everything down. I sent a cease and desist letter through my attorney, officially notifying the HOA that their construction was trespassing and must stop immediately. I sent copies to the board president, the management company, and the construction firm working the site. I didn't sugarcoat it. They had crossed the line, and if they didn't pull back, I'd see them in court. 2 days later, I heard the change before I saw it. The rumble of heavy machinery had stopped. No more shouting, no more metal clanking. Just silence. When I walked down to the lake, I saw a handful of workers standing around, not doing much. Some were packing up equipment. Others looked like they were waiting for orders that never came. The banner was still there, but part of it had come loose and flapped weakly in the wind. I got a call that evening. It was the HOA president, Karen, of course. You could hear the frustration in her voice, trying to stay polite but clearly unraveling. "We were under the impression that the land was under shared use," she said. "You were wrong," I replied. "Well, this affects a lot of residents. We've already taken deposits for vacation rentals." "That's not my problem," I said. "You built on private land without permission." There was a pause, then a sigh. "Maybe there's a way we can resolve this, financially." I smirked. "Oh, I'm sure there is." I hung up and looked out at the lake again. The surface was still, but underneath, I could feel it. Something had shifted. They tried to build their dream empire on my land. Now they were the ones scrambling. And I wasn't done yet. I didn't hear anything from the HOA for a few days after that call. No emails, no letters, not even one of their usual passive-aggressive notices stuffed into a mailbox. For a moment, I thought maybe they'd come to their senses and were just trying to quietly back away from the mess they'd made. But I should have known better. On the 5th day, a big black SUV rolled up my driveway. It had no plates, just a dealership logo, and 2 men in suits stepped out. One of them was holding a leather briefcase. The other looked like he was there just to cross his arms and scowl. They introduced themselves as representatives of Lakeside Development Partners, which, apparently, was the HOA's new business partner on the resort project. The briefcase guy handed me a folder and started talking fast. He used words like misunderstanding, community benefit, and mutual opportunity. He said the HOA was willing to make things right by offering me a generous compensation package in exchange for a long-term lease of my lakeside land. According to them, I'd still technically own the property, but they'd control access for their guests, events, and operations. I didn't even open the folder. I told them the land wasn't for lease. Not now. Not ever. The scowling guy finally spoke. "You're turning down millions, sir." I looked him right in the eye. "You built without asking. You stole land. You think you can buy your way out?" Briefcase guy cleared his throat and tried to calm things down, but I was done. I handed the folder back and told them to leave. I don't know if they were bluffing or if they really thought I'd cave, but I wasn't interested in any kind of deal, not on their terms. As they drove off, I decided to dig even deeper. I spent the next few days researching every permit the HOA had filed in the last year. What I found was jaw-dropping. Not only had they failed to file for permission to build on my land, they had also lied on several of their community filings. They claimed the lake was community accessible and labeled parts of it as undeveloped common space in their investor documents, which, legally, was a huge problem. You can't raise money for a project by lying about what land you own. My lawyer and I compiled every piece of evidence: photos, drone footage, zoning documents, copies of their investor presentations, and prepared a formal legal notice. We weren't just threatening to sue anymore. We were preparing for real damages. And at this point, I wasn't just going to stop them, I was going to make sure they paid for every single inch they crossed. Then, something unexpected happened. While I was preparing all this legal firepower, a major resort company reached out to me. A real one, not some HOA side hustle in a suit. They'd somehow caught wind of the development drama and were interested in acquiring lakeside property for a high-end destination retreat. They had money. Real money. And they didn't just want to lease the land, they wanted to buy the whole thing. At first, I didn't take it seriously. But they kept calling. Then they flew a rep out to meet me in person. He walked the land, took photos, asked questions about water quality, topography, wildlife access. He wasn't just talking, he had a vision. And more importantly, he had no ties to the HOA. When he made his first offer, I nearly dropped the phone. It was more than I'd ever imagined. Then a second offer came in, higher. The resort company had competition. 2 days later, another hospitality firm contacted me, saying they'd been eyeing the area for months but couldn't touch it because of the HOA's hold. Now that the HOA had no legal rights to the lake, they were back in play. My quiet piece of land, the one I'd inherited from my grandfather, had suddenly become the most valuable asset in the region. Not because of what I'd done, but because the HOA had tried to steal it and accidentally turned it into a golden spotlight. They wanted a resort? Well, they were about to get one. Just not the way they thought. And this time, I was the one holding the keys. Word spread fast after the resort companies got involved. I didn't tell many people, but somehow folks started whispering about offers, meetings, and land surveys happening on my property. It wasn't just gossip, some of the HOA members were starting to get nervous. And it showed. A week after the second buyer walked my land, I started getting phone calls. First from random board members. Then from homeowners I'd never even met. Some were polite. Some were aggressive. One woman flat out begged me not to sell the land to strangers. She said it would ruin the community, tank property values, and destroy the peaceful vibe. I almost laughed. Peaceful? After they bulldozed half my shoreline and tried to steal my lake? But I didn't lash out. I just listened. Because the more they talked, the more I realized something important. Most of them had no idea what the HOA had done. They'd been fed a filtered version of the story. The board had told them the resort was fully approved. That the HOA had reached an agreement with the landowner, implying me. They were completely in the dark. That made me pause. Not because I was rethinking the deal, but because it was clear the real villain wasn't the neighborhood, it was the people in charge of it. And then came the emergency HOA meeting. I wasn't invited, obviously. But someone slipped me the Zoom link anyway. It was chaos. Homeowners were furious. A group of them had finally read through the documents I'd submitted to the county, the proof that the land wasn't HOA property, that the permits were falsified, and that the development sat entirely on land the HOA didn't control. They started demanding answers from the board. Karen, the president, tried to keep it together, but she was cracking under pressure. Her usual calm voice was shaky, defensive. "It was a miscommunication," she said. Someone shouted back, "You told us you had a signed deal." Another voice cut through the noise. "Why did we spend HOA dues on a project that's not even on our land?" I muted my mic and just listened. It was like watching a tower fall in slow motion. They weren't mad at me. They were mad at her. At the whole board. At the lies, the manipulation, the wasted money. That night, I made my decision. I called the top bidder, the first resort company that had visited me. They were professional, respectful, and had been straight with me from the start. I told them I was ready to move forward. The paperwork moved quickly. Within days, we were drafting the sale agreement. Full buyout. No HOA involvement. Every foot of shoreline, every tree, every piece of land, sold. And the number? Let's just say it had more zeros than I'll ever need. While the deal was in escrow, I took one last walk around the lake. The wind was still. The water clear. The dock where my grandfather used to sit was weathered, but solid. I ran my hand along the railing and just stood there for a while, watching the light dance across the surface. It didn't feel like I was losing something. It felt like I was setting it free. The HOA had tried to claim something that was never theirs. They lied. They built. They pushed. And in the end, they lost everything. Not because I fought them with anger, but because I fought them with facts. With patience. With ownership. And now, the same land they thought they could control had become a billion-dollar asset, one they couldn't touch. I didn't sell out. I cashed in. And they had no one to blame but themselves. The sale closed quietly, but the aftermath was anything but. Within 48 hours of the deal being finalized, surveyors, engineers, and executives started arriving on site. They weren't sneaky about it like the HOA had been. These were professionals, clearly labeled vehicles, project managers with clipboards, and real safety fences. It was the kind of organized chaos that made you realize how big this project was about to become. What shocked the neighborhood most wasn't just that someone else now owned the land. It was that the HOA was completely shut out. No influence, no leverage, no seat at the table. After years of acting like they ran the whole area, they suddenly found themselves as outsiders looking in, just like they had treated everyone else. Karen tried to spin it. She went door to door with flyers claiming she had warned everyone about corporate development. She said she had tried to negotiate better terms, but was shut out by forces beyond her control. No one believed her anymore. Not after the lies that surfaced in that Zoom call. Not after everyone saw the land survey maps for themselves, marked with bold red lines that confirmed the truth. The HOA had built part of a resort on land they didn't own. To make matters worse for them, the new resort company issued a public statement. It wasn't flashy, just a short press release that outlined their plans. Full renovation of the lakeside area, new trails, public viewing decks, private lodging units, and strict no-access zones for surrounding residents unless invited. They even mentioned that the previous, unauthorized construction would be removed and replaced according to environmental regulations. That last part hit the HOA hard. They'd spent thousands, maybe tens of thousands, on that fake resort foundation. Now it was going to be bulldozed and rebuilt the right way, under new ownership, with none of their names attached. The board held another meeting, this time in person, hoping to rally support. But no one showed up except a few loyal followers, and even they were more interested in complaining than defending anyone. A few days later, someone spray-painted "liar" across the side of the HOA's little community office. I don't condone vandalism, but it said what most people were thinking. The trust was gone. Meanwhile, I kept to myself. I had more calls now, attorneys, media outlets, even a few podcasts asking for interviews. I ignored most of them. This wasn't a story I wanted to parade around. It was personal. I didn't need the attention. I had the satisfaction of watching a system that tried to trample me completely collapse under the weight of its own arrogance. Funny enough, the resort folks offered to name part of the development after me. Water's Edge Lodge, they suggested, based on the nickname my family used for the lake. I politely declined. I didn't need a name on a sign. I just needed to know that the land would be taken care of, respectfully, properly, and legally. As for Karen, She disappeared from the neighborhood not long after. Her house went dark, the blinds shut tight. One morning, a moving truck pulled into her driveway. By sunset, she was gone. Some said she moved out of state. Others heard she was being sued by angry homeowners who wanted their dues back. Either way, no one missed her. The board disbanded shortly after. With no credibility and no real leadership, the HOA fell apart from the inside. The dues stopped coming in. The newsletters stopped printing. The ridiculous rule enforcement vanished. In its place, a neighborhood that was actually peaceful. Ironically, the thing they always claimed to protect was only possible once they were out of the picture. One afternoon, I sat on the edge of the lake again. This time, I wasn't worried about fences or bulldozers or trespassers. The air felt clean, quiet, like it had returned to what it was always meant to be. I heard laughter across the water. One of the new survey teams had brought their families along. Kids were playing near the temporary dock. Someone was skipping stones. Nobody was yelling about violations or guidelines. Nobody was handing out fines for stepping over invisible lines. The HOA was gone. The resort was coming. And for once, the lake finally belonged to people who respected it. Not long after the final truck rolled off Karen's property and the HOA quietly folded, the changes started to show. It was subtle at first. Neighbors began doing small repairs and improvements without waiting for permission. The rusted stop sign near the main road? Replaced. The broken community bench by the trailhead? Fixed and repainted by a retired couple who lived 3 houses down. Nobody asked them to do it. They just did. No forms, no fees, no approval needed. The funny thing is, the place started to look better than it ever did under the HOA's rule. People had always assumed the HOA was what kept the neighborhood clean and organized. But once it collapsed, the community didn't fall apart. It actually came together. Without Karen's constant threats, people felt free to take initiative. A guy named Marcus, who used to be fined for keeping his tools in sight, built a small tool-sharing shed near the cul-de-sac. Anyone could borrow equipment and drop it back off. No one abused it. No one locked it. It just worked. One woman who'd stopped gardening because of itch fines started planting flowers again, big, wild blooms in bright colors that stretched out past her old, regulation height fence. Instead of reporting her, her neighbors helped water the plants while she was out of town. The place was finally breathing. And just across the lake, construction on the official resort had begun in full. Only this time, everything was above board. The development company had sent out clean, professional notices about the project. They held actual town hall sessions, open to the public, where residents could ask questions and offer feedback. Nobody shouted. Nobody was silenced. And unlike the HOA, the resort team actually listened. They even changed some of their design after hearing from locals. They moved a maintenance building further back from the tree line to preserve the trail views. They agreed to keep heavy construction traffic off residential roads during school hours. It was clear they weren't just here to squeeze every penny out of the land. They wanted to make something lasting. I watched all this unfold from my porch, sipping coffee most mornings with a quiet grin. I never once felt the urge to interfere. My part was done. The land was theirs now, and they were treating it with care, something the HOA never bothered to do. Still, not everyone was thrilled. A few die-hard HOA supporters, what was left of them, grumbled online about outsiders taking over their lake. They complained that the resort would ruin the character of the neighborhood. But their voices didn't carry much weight anymore. After everything that had come out, the lies, the stolen land, the wasted dues, they had no credibility left. One of them even tried to start a petition to reinstate the HOA. It got 3 signatures. People were done being controlled. Done being fined for where they parked or how tall their grass grew. And no one missed the fear that came with a letter from the board showing up in your mailbox. That fear had been replaced with trust, between neighbors, between the land and its new stewards, and most of all, in the idea that freedom didn't mean chaos. It meant responsibility. A month into construction, I received a letter, not from the HOA, obviously, but from the resort team. It was a simple thank you note. They'd finalized plans to include a conservation section around part of the lake and wanted to honor the family who had cared for it all those years. No press release. No plaque. Just a genuine letter of appreciation. It made me think of my grandfather, sitting quietly at the edge of that dock, never raising his voice, never needing to prove a point. Just present. Just steady. That's how I wanted this land to feel again, steady and alive. The noise of drills and hammers echoed in the distance, but it didn't bother me anymore. It was progress, not destruction. The kind of noise that comes when something real is being built. Not just buildings, but a better way of doing things. Without force. Without fear. Just people doing the right thing, finally. The biggest surprise came about 2 months after construction had started. I got a call from someone I didn't expect, one of the former HOA board members. Not Karen, of course. She had vanished like smoke the moment things turned against her. This was Jeff, the treasurer. He was always the quiet one during meetings, rarely spoke unless asked, and even then, usually kept it brief. Now he sounded nervous, like someone trying to walk across thin ice. He started by saying he didn't agree with how everything had gone down. He said he had raised concerns during the early resort planning stages but had been overruled by Karen and her loyalists. According to him, the vote to proceed without delay had happened after I was falsely marked as unresponsive and uninvolved. They never even attempted real contact. They just wrote me off on paper so they could push forward. It didn't surprise me. But what he said next did. Jeff revealed that the HOA hadn't just used member dues to fund early resort construction. They had also dipped into the reserve fund, money set aside for emergency repairs, legal coverage, and community improvements. When homeowners started asking why the common area lights hadn't been fixed or why the tennis court resurfacing had been delayed again, the truth was they'd already blown through the budget. On land they didn't own. There were lawsuits brewing. People were lawyering up. At least 4 separate households had sent official complaints to the State Housing Board. And while the HOA technically no longer existed, its former board members could still be held personally accountable for fraud and mismanagement. Jeff wasn't just calling me out of guilt. He was looking for advice, or maybe protection. He knew I had kept quiet, stayed respectful, never publicly dragged anyone. Now he was hoping I'd stay that way if things got worse. I didn't make any promises. But when I hung up, I did feel something shift. This wasn't just about a lake anymore. It was about how power, real or imagined, can unravel everything when it's abused. Karen and her crew had built a house of cards, all smoke and rules and threats, pretending to be more powerful than they were. And the moment someone pushed back, the whole thing collapsed. Meanwhile, across the lake, the real builders were making progress. The new docks were taking shape. The lodge foundation was almost done. They'd even added a community walking trail that ran along the edge of the property, open to the public during daylight hours. No fences. No gates. Just a gravel path and a sign that said, "Respect the land. Enjoy the view." People started using it. Some of the same neighbors who used to glare at me for trimming my own trees without permission now waved when they saw me. Kids rode their bikes along the trail. A family even set up a little picnic area near the curve of the shoreline. They didn't ask. They just assumed it was okay. And it was. This land was always meant to be shared, but not stolen, not controlled, not twisted into someone else's idea of luxury. Real peace doesn't come from rules written in binders. It comes from knowing when to let go, when to stand your ground, and when to give others space to live freely too. I heard once that water remembers. That every ripple tells a story. And looking out over the lake now, it felt like the water had started telling a new one. Not about fines or fences or fear, but about change. About calm. About what happens when the people who thought they owned everything finally realized they never did. The old HOA office down the street was still empty. The sign was gone. The locks had been changed. Nobody talked about electing a new board. Nobody wanted one. People were doing just fine without it. Maybe even better than before. And as the sun dipped low and cast a soft glow across the lake, I realized something else. The best revenge hadn't come from yelling or suing or dragging them through the mud. It came from doing nothing but standing still. From knowing that I had the truth, the title, and the time to wait them out. Now they were gone. And the lake, at last, was quiet.